For 12 years, no one in the kingdom of Veyr had
I will
touched
get
the
you out
beast
of here.
behind the iron gates. Not the king.
Don't lose hope,
Not the
buddy.
soldiers.
I'll
Not
get
the
you out.
royal healers who had once entered that prison carrying ropes, sleeping
get this
herbs,
off.
heavy shields, and enough courage to convince themselves they were not afraid. They had all failed. The creature remained there, chained beneath the eastern tower of the royal fortress, hidden from the people and spoken about only in whispers. Some called it a demon. Some called it the king's weapon. Others believed it was something much older and far more dangerous. But everyone agreed on one thing. No one was supposed to go near it. Then, on the coldest morning of the winter, a young woman carrying a wooden bucket walked through the forbidden corridor. Her name was Elara. She was not a warrior. She carried no sword. She wore no royal colors. She was simply a poor healer's daughter who had come to the fortress looking for work after losing her father. And she had been told one very simple rule: never enter the wolf vault. But the first thing Elara heard that morning was not a warning. It was a whimper. She stopped. Behind the enormous iron gates, something moved. Chains scraped across stone. A deep growl rolled through the corridor. The guards reached for their swords. Don't move. Elara looked through the bars. And there he was. A massive white wolf stood in the darkness. His fur was dirty. His body was covered in old scars. Iron chains wrapped around his legs and neck. And across his face was a thick black muzzle that had cut so deeply into his skin that dried blood stained the fur beneath it. The wolf looked terrifying, until Elara looked into his eyes. Then she saw something nobody else had noticed. Fear. She lowered the bucket. The wolf slammed against the chains. The guards shouted. But Elara did not run. She stepped closer. One careful step. Then another. The beast stopped. For the first time in 12 years, the wolf vault became completely silent. Elara slowly raised her hand. Her fingers trembled as they approached the iron muzzle. Then she noticed the symbol carved into the metal. A royal seal. But beneath it was another mark. One that had disappeared from Veyr more than a century ago. Elara knew that symbol. She had seen it in her mother's old healing book. She whispered a single word. Guardian. The old royal guard behind her went pale. And before anyone could stop her, Elara wrapped both hands around the iron muzzle. The metal burned her palms. The wolf remained perfectly still. She pulled. The ancient fastening cracked. Once. Twice. Then the muzzle fell into the snow. Every sword in the corridor came halfway out of its sheath. But the beast did not attack. Instead, the enormous white wolf lowered his head and pressed his scarred face gently against Elara's trembling hands. And high above them, behind a narrow castle window, Alpha King Caelan watched the impossible happen. The beast his father had called a monster had just chosen a human being to trust. Winter had buried the kingdom of Veyr beneath a thick blanket of snow. From the highest tower of the royal fortress, the land looked endless and white. The mountains rose like frozen walls around the kingdom. Dark forests stretched between them. Smoke climbed from village chimneys and disappeared into the pale morning sky. Far below the fortress, people moved slowly through the snow, carrying firewood, baskets, and sacks of grain. Life continued. It always did. Even when people were hungry. Even when fathers disappeared into the mountains and did not return. Even when winter took more than it gave. And above them all stood the fortress of Veyr. Black stone, iron gates, high towers, narrow windows glowing with firelight. It had been built hundreds of years earlier by the first Alpha King, when the kingdom was still little more than a collection of mountain villages. The people called it the Crown of Stone. The servants had another name for it. The old ones called it the place where secrets went to die. Elara had never understood that phrase. Not until she began working there. She was 26 years old when she arrived at the fortress. She came with one wool cloak, a small wooden chest, 3 silver coins, and the last things that had belonged to her father. His old knife, his worn leather gloves, and a small piece of pine wood he had carved for her when she was a child. She kept the carving in her pocket. She touched it whenever she missed him. Her father had been a woodcutter. Her mother had been a healer. Together, They had raised Elara in a little house beside the northern forest. It had never been rich, but it had been warm. There had been herbs hanging from the ceiling, firewood beside the stove, a small garden behind the house, and her father's boots beside the door. Then one afternoon, a tree came down. There had been no warning, no time to move. By sunset, her father was dead. The forest that had always been their friend had taken him. Afterward, the house became too quiet. Elara tried to keep it. She sold her mother's herbs, then her mother's books, then the small garden. Winter came. There was no money left, so she went to the fortress. The kitchen master saw her hands and asked whether she could work. She said yes. He gave her a room beneath the western stairs. It was barely large enough for a bed, but it was warm, and for Elara, that was enough. She spent her mornings washing vegetables, her afternoons carrying water, her evenings helping the kitchen healers prepare herbs. She did not complain. She had learned from her mother that complaining did not make wounds close. You cleaned them, you wrapped them, you waited, and sometimes you prayed. That was how Elara lived, quietly, until she heard the wolf. The first time happened after midnight. She had been carrying a tray of empty cups through the servants' corridor when the sound came from somewhere beneath the fortress. A low vibration, so deep she felt it more than heard it. She stopped. The candle flame trembled. Then came another sound, a growl. Elara turned toward the servant walking behind her. The woman had gone completely still. Did you hear that? The woman shook her head too quickly. Elara looked at her. You did. Don't ask. Why? The woman lowered her voice. The wolf vault. Elara frowned. What is that? The woman stared at her as though she had asked where the moon went during the day. You really don't know? No. The woman looked toward the dark corridor. Then she whispered, the king keeps something there. Something? A beast. What kind? The woman swallowed. A wolf. Elara almost smiled. A wolf. You laugh now. I'm not laughing. You should be afraid. Elara looked toward the corridor. Why? The woman leaned closer. Because 12 years ago, that wolf killed 3 royal soldiers. Elara's expression changed. 3? What happened to it? They chained it. Then why is it still alive? The woman did not answer. She simply picked up the tray and hurried away. Elara stood alone. The candle flickered. Somewhere beneath the stone floor, the wolf growled again. The next morning, Elara forgot about it. Or tried to. She had work. There was bread to prepare, vegetables to wash, a basket of dried herbs to carry to the royal healer. The fortress was already awake when she entered the kitchen. Servants moved between tables. Knives struck wooden boards. Pots boiled over open fires. Steam filled the room. Someone shouted about missing flour. Someone else complained about the cold. Elara carried a basket toward the eastern corridor. That was when she saw the guard. He was an old man named Garan. She had seen him many times but had never spoken to him. He stood beside a heavy wooden door. His beard was white. His back was bent, but his eyes were sharp. He looked at Elara, then at the basket. Where are you going? To the healer's room. Use the western passage. She stopped. Why? Because this corridor is closed. Elara looked beyond him. At the end of the corridor stood 2 enormous iron doors. She heard something behind them, a faint scrape. Garen's face tightened. Go. Elara obeyed, but she looked back. The doors were covered in old scratches. Some were deep enough to expose the stone beneath the iron. And in the center was a royal seal. 3 lines. 1 circle. The same symbol she had seen in her mother's book. She did not know why that frightened her more than the stories. 3 days later, she saw the beast. A stable boy came running into the kitchen just before dawn. One of the young wolves kept near the royal horses had been injured. Elara followed him. She found the animal near the eastern courtyard. Its paw was bleeding. She knelt. It's all right. The wolf trembled. She wrapped the wound. Then the animal suddenly pulled away. It stared toward the eastern tower. Its ears rose. Then it ran. Elara stood. Wait. The wolf disappeared through the corridor. Elara followed. She knew she should not. But the animal was injured. And she could not leave it. She reached the eastern tower. The corridor was empty. Snow had blown through a broken window and covered the stones. The injured wolf stood before the iron gate. Beyond it, something moved. Elara stopped. The stable wolf whined. The creature inside rose slowly. Elara's breath caught. It was enormous. White fur, black eyes, long scars, chains around its body, and the muzzle. Gods. The muzzle. Iron covered its entire mouth and lower face. The metal was old and black. It had been tightened so many times that the edges had cut into the skin. Elara stared. The wolf stared back. The stable wolf ran away. The white beast did not move. Then one of the guards entered the corridor. The moment he saw the animal standing, he raised his spear. The beast exploded forward. Chains crashed. The guard shouted. Elara stepped between them. Wait. The guard looked at her, as though she had lost her mind. Move. He is injured. He's a killer. He is chained. He'll kill you. Elara looked at the wolf. The creature was shaking. Not attacking. Shaking. Its claws scraped against the stone. Its breathing came fast through the small openings in the muzzle. Elara slowly lowered herself to the floor. The guard stared. What are you doing? Nothing. Get up. Elara ignored him. She took a piece of dried meat from her pocket. She placed it on the ground. Then she moved back. The wolf watched. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Finally, the creature lowered its head. It smelled the meat. Then it took one step. Another. The chain pulled tight. The wolf stopped. It looked at Elara. She did not move. The animal picked up the meat and retreated. The guard whispered something under his breath. Elara remained seated. She could hear the creature chewing. Slowly, carefully. When it finished, it looked at her again. She stood. Tomorrow. Then she walked away. The next morning, she returned. The meat was gone. So she brought more. The day after that, she brought water. Then broth. Then a blanket. It became a habit. Elara never tried to touch the beast. She simply sat outside the gate. Sometimes she spoke. Sometimes she remained silent. She told him about the snow, about the kitchen, about the old woman who kept burning the bread, about the garden she once had, about her father. The wolf never answered, but it listened, and gradually something changed. When Elara entered the corridor, the wolf stopped pressing against the chains. When she sat down, it came closer. When she left, it watched her until she disappeared. The guards noticed. The servants noticed. And eventually the king noticed. Alpha King Caelan was 31 years old. He had inherited the crown 3 years earlier after his father's death. Unlike his father, Caelan did not enjoy cruelty. But he had inherited something else. Fear. The fear that the kingdom would fall apart if he ever appeared weak. He had spent 3 years trying to rule a court filled with men who remembered his father. Men who believed a king should never hesitate, never apologize, never show mercy to something dangerous. Especially not the beast beneath the eastern tower. Caelan had never seen it closely. His father had forbidden him. But his father was dead now. And the creature was still alive. One evening, Caelan stood before the eastern window. Snow covered the courtyard. Below, Elara walked toward the wolf vault carrying a bowl. Caelan watched her. Who is that? Garan stood behind him. A kitchen servant. Why is she going there? Garan hesitated. She feeds it. Caelan turned. What? For several weeks. Why was I not told? Garan looked uncomfortable. I thought it harmless. Caelan walked to the window. The beast was barely visible in the darkness. Then Elara sat beside the gate. The wolf moved toward her. Caelan stared. His father's words returned to him. Never trust the beast. Never remove the muzzle. Never let it remember. Caelan had never understood the last command. Remember what? He turned. Bring the woman to me. Garan bowed. An hour later, Elara stood inside the king's chamber. She had never been this close to the throne. The room was enormous. fire burned behind iron screens. Tall windows showed only snow. Caelan stood beside the hearth. He did not sit. You have been visiting the wolf vault. Elara lowered her eyes. Yes, your majesty. Why? Because it is hungry. You know what it is? A wolf. His expression hardened. That's all. Elara looked at him. I don't know what people say about it. I asked what you know. She hesitated. Then she answered honestly. I know it is afraid. Silence. Caelan stared at her. Garan, standing near the door, slowly lifted his head. No one had ever said that. Not once. Caelan stepped closer. Afraid? Elara nodded. Of what?
She thought of the chains.
The people around it. Something moved in Caelan's face.
Pain.
Only for a moment. Then it disappeared. Do you know how many men that creature has hurt?
No.
3 soldiers died because of it. Elara looked down. How many men heard it first? Caelan said nothing. She realized she had gone too far. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. His voice was quieter. Just answer me this. Why does it allow you near it? I don't know. Are you certain? Elara looked toward the window. Maybe because I don't ask it to be something else. Caelan studied her. Then he said the words that would change everything. Go back tomorrow. Elara looked at him. Your Majesty? Take whatever food you need. He paused. But I want to know what happens. That night, Elara returned to the servants' quarters. She slept badly. Outside, the wind screamed across the fortress. Near midnight, she woke. The sound was coming again. The wolf. But this time it was not growling. It was howling.
Long. Deep.
Mournful. Elara sat up. Other servants woke. Some crossed themselves. Others covered their ears. The howl continued. But there was something strange about it. It was not aimed at the moon. It was aimed upward, toward the king's chambers. Caelan heard it too. He stood alone beside his window. The howl rose through the fortress, then stopped. Caelan looked toward the eastern tower. For the first time in his life, he wondered whether the beast had been imprisoned because it was dangerous, or because someone was afraid of what it remembered. The following morning, Elara entered the wolf vault before sunrise. The fortress was still asleep. Only the guards were awake. The corridors smelled of cold stone and dying fires. Elara carried a bowl of meat in one hand and a small cloth bag in the other. She had packed herbs, clean water, bandages, and a small pair of scissors. The moment she opened the outer gate, the wolf lifted its head. Its eyes found her. Elara smiled faintly. Good morning. The creature did not move. She placed the bowl down. Then she looked at the chains. Something was different. The wolf had not slept. Its body was rigid. Its breathing was shallow. Elara stepped closer. She saw why. The iron muzzle had shifted during the night. One edge had dug deeper into the skin. Fresh blood marked the white fur beneath it. Elara's face tightened. She knelt. That hurts, doesn't it? The wolf looked away. She opened her bag. The creature immediately became tense. Elara stopped. I'm not going to hurt you. She slowly removed a strip of clean cloth. The wolf watched. She placed it on the floor. Then she waited. Minutes passed. The wolf approached. It smelled the cloth. Then it looked at Elara. She extended her hand. Not toward its face. Only halfway. The wolf stared at her fingers. Its nose moved. One step. Then another. Elara held perfectly still. The creature came close enough that she could feel its breath against her skin. She almost stopped breathing. The wolf lowered its head. Its nose touched her fingertips. For 1 second, neither moved. Then the wolf pulled away. Elara smiled. That's enough. She did not try again. Above them, hidden behind the stone balcony, Caelan watched. He had come before dawn. He wanted to see the truth with his own eyes. He had expected the creature to attack. Instead, he watched it touch Elara's hand. Something inside him shifted. For 12 years, his family had told him the wolf could never be trusted. Yet the beast had shown more restraint with a frightened kitchen servant than most men showed with their enemies. Caelan remained hidden. Elara began examining the muzzle. She did not touch it directly at first. She studied the straps, the metal, the fastenings. Then she frowned. This was changed. The wolf looked at her. She touched one of the leather straps. Fresh stitching. Not 12 years old. Recent. Elara's stomach tightened. Someone had been maintaining the muzzle. She examined another fastening. New iron. New rivets. The punishment was not simply old. Someone had continued it. She stood and went to the guard. Who replaces these? The guard avoided her eyes. I don't know. Someone does. Don't ask questions. Who? The guard said nothing. Elara looked back at the wolf, then toward the balcony. She could feel someone watching.
She knew who it was.
Your Majesty. Caelan stepped into view. The guards immediately bowed. Elara did too. Caelan descended the stone stairs. His boots echoed through the chamber. The wolf rose. Chains tightened. Caelan stopped. The beast stared at him. For a moment, king and creature simply watched one another. Caelan had expected hatred. Instead, he saw recognition. His breath caught. The wolf knew him, or knew his blood. Caelan looked at Elara. You said the muzzle was changed. Yes. When? I don't know. But recently? She nodded. Very recently.
Caelan looked at the guards.
Who has access? No one answered. The silence was enough. Something was wrong. Caelan ordered the guards to leave. Soon only he, Elara, and the wolf remained. Caelan stepped closer. The wolf growled. Elara turned. Don't. Caelan stopped. You can command it?
No.
Then what? I ask. Caelan looked at her. You think it understands you. I think it understands kindness. He almost smiled. Almost. Then his eyes returned to the muzzle. Can you remove it? Elara swallowed. I don't know. Try. She approached the wolf. The creature watched her. Elara placed her hand against the iron. The moment she touched it, the wolf recoiled. Its entire body shook. The silver symbol on the muzzle seemed to darken. Elara pulled her hand away. She stared. There's magic in it. Caelan frowned. How do you know? My mother taught me. What was your mother? A healer. She knew magic?
No.
Elara looked at the muzzle. She knew when something was hurting. Caelan stepped closer. What does the symbol mean? I don't know yet. She touched the iron again. Heat traveled through her palm. She winced. The wolf growled. Not at her. At the muzzle. Elara understood. It is hurting you. The wolf lowered its head. Caelan's jaw tightened. Can you remove it? Elara looked at the king. I might. Then do it. She hesitated. If it attacks, I'll stop it. Elara looked into his eyes. And if you can't, Caelan answered quietly. Then I will accept the consequences. She nodded. Elara wrapped both hands around the muzzle. The metal burned. Her palms began to sting. She pulled. Nothing happened. The wolf remained still. Elara pulled harder. The fastening resisted. Her shoulders shook. The wolf closed its eyes. Hold on. She pulled again. A crack echoed through the chamber. Caelan's hand went to his sword. The silver mark flashed. Elara cried out. The muzzle cracked. She did not release it. She pulled one final time. The fastening broke. The iron muzzle fell into the snow. Silence. Absolute silence. The wolf raised its head. Its mouth opened. Elara stepped back. The creature looked enormous without the metal. Its scars were visible now. So was its pain. It slowly walked toward her. Caelan drew his sword. Elara. She did not move. The wolf stopped inches away. Its nose touched her shoulder. Then it lowered its head. Elara reached up. Her hand disappeared into thick white fur. The wolf closed its eyes. Caelan stared. He had expected blood. Instead, he witnessed trust. Then the beast turned. Its gaze moved toward him. Caelan lowered his sword. The wolf looked at him for several seconds. Then it bowed its head. Caelan's face went pale. Father was wrong. Elara looked at him. What? Caelan could barely speak. He said the beast hated the royal bloodline. The wolf's silver mark began to glow. Elara touched it. The light moved from the wolf's shoulder to her hand. A faint silver mark appeared on her wrist. Caelan stepped forward. And somewhere beneath the fortress, something ancient answered. The first thing the kingdom learned after the muzzle was removed was that the beast did not attack. The second thing it learned was far more frightening. The beast had a name. Vaelor. Caelan was the one who spoke it. He had entered the wolf vault at dawn carrying an old lantern. When he saw the wolf standing freely beside Elara, he stopped so suddenly that the lantern nearly fell from his hand.
His face changed.
Not fear. Recognition. Vaelor. The wolf turned. Garen's eyes filled with tears. I thought you were dead. Caelan stared at the old guardian. You know him? Garen looked toward the king. I knew his father. Elara looked at Vaelor. The enormous wolf stood quietly beside her. He no longer pulled against chains. No longer tried to escape. He simply watched. Garen stepped closer. Your Majesty, we need to speak. They moved into the adjoining chamber. Vaelor followed Elara. Garen closed the door. The guardian wolves were never monsters. Caelan's face hardened. Then what were they? Protectors. Of what? The throne. Caelan stared. Garen continued. The first kings of Veyr did not rule alone. They were bound to wolves born in the northern mountains. Each generation had one guardian. And Vaelor? The last. Caelan looked toward the wolf vault. Why was he imprisoned? Garen hesitated. Because your father was afraid. Of Vaelor. Of what Vaelor remembered. The words hung in the air. Elara's fingers tightened around her sleeve. What happened? Garen looked at her. Your family knew. Elara froze. My family? Garen nodded. Your mother was not merely a village healer. Elara's heart began to pound. What was she? Her family belonged to the keepers. Caelan stepped closer. What keepers? The people who cared for the guardian wolves. Elara shook her head. My mother never told me. She was protecting you. From what? Garen looked toward the ceiling. From the truth. Before he could say more, footsteps echoed outside. Malric entered. Commander Malric. His eyes went immediately to Vaelor, then to the broken muzzle lying in the snow. His face became hard. You removed it. Elara stood. It was hurting him. Malric's hand moved toward a sword. Caelan stepped between them. Enough. Malric bowed. My king. You knew the muzzle was being replaced. Malric's expression did not change. It was necessary. Why? Because the beast is dangerous. Caelan looked toward Vaelor. The wolf was sitting quietly beside Elara. Dangerous to whom? Malric did not answer. That silence told Caelan more than words could. From that day, the fortress changed. Rumors spread. The king had freed the beast. A kitchen servant had touched it. The creature had not attacked. Some called it a miracle. Others called it treason. Malric fed the fear. He told soldiers that Elara had bewitched the wolf. He told nobles that the king had become weak. He told villagers that an ancient evil had been unleashed. By sunset, people were whispering in every corner of the fortress. But Elara did not listen. She stayed with Vaelor. His wounds needed cleaning. His paws were badly cracked. His body carried scars that no one could count. Some were from chains. Others were from blades. One long scar crossed his chest. Another disappeared beneath his fur. Elara washed each wound. Vaelor never resisted. When she touched his injured paw, he lowered his head. When she changed his bandages, he watched her carefully. At night, he slept near the door of her small room. Caelan noticed. He also noticed that Vaelor followed Elara everywhere. Not like a trained animal. Like a guardian. One evening, Elara walked through the old gallery. Vaelor stopped. She took another step. He did not move. What's wrong? The wolf stared at a painting. Elara followed his gaze. It was an old portrait covered in dust. A young king stood beside a white wolf. The same silver mark appeared on the wolf's shoulder. Elara stepped closer. The king in the painting wore a crown unlike Caelan's. His hand rested on the wolf's head. Beneath the portrait was an inscription. She read it slowly. When the crown is threatened, the guardian remembers. Caelan entered behind her. He stared at the painting. I've never seen this. It was hidden. Why? Elara touched the frame. A small compartment opened. Inside was an old parchment. Caelan unfolded it. His face changed. What is it? A record. Of what? The night my father became king. The parchment described a battle, a betrayal, and the disappearance of the previous guardian wolves. At the bottom was one name, Malric. Caelan's hand tightened.
No.
Elara looked at him. You know him. He served my father. Then he knows the truth. Caelan folded the parchment. We need proof. Vaelor suddenly growled. They turned. The wolf stood before a stone wall. He scratched once.
Twice.
Then looked back at them. Elara approached. There is something behind this. Caelan pushed against the wall. Nothing. Caelan arrived moments later. When he saw the wolf's position, his face went pale. The old chamber. What chamber? The first king's chamber. They searched the wall. Eventually, Caelan found a hidden stone. He pressed it. The wall opened. Cold air rushed out. Beyond it was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Elara held the lantern. Vaelor went first. Caelan followed. Caelan came behind. The deeper they went, the older the fortress became.
The walls changed.
Black stone became gray. Then rough mountain rock. Roots pushed through the ceiling. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. Finally, they reached a chamber. Paintings covered the walls. Women with silver marks on their wrists. White wolves beside them. Kings kneeling before them. Elara approached one mural. A woman stood beside a white wolf. The wolf had the same silver mark as Vaelor. The woman had the same mark that had appeared on Elara's wrist. Her breath stopped. That's my family. Caelan stared. How do you know? Elara touched the painting. The silver mark on her wrist began glowing. Vaelor stepped forward. The entire chamber filled with pale light. Then a sound echoed behind them. Stone scraping. The doorway slammed shut. Elara turned. Malric stood on the other side. He held a torch. His expression was calm, almost smiling. You should never have opened that door. He threw the torch onto the dry roots beside the wall. Fire erupted. Smoke filled the chamber. Caelan rushed toward the door. It would not open. Malric. The commander stepped backward. The king is dead. Then he disappeared. The fire climbed higher. Elara grabbed Vaelor's fur. Caelan pulled at the stone door. Caelan coughed. And beneath their feet, the ancient mountain began to shake. The smoke became thicker by the second. Elara could barely see Caelan. The chamber filled with the smell of burning roots and ancient dust. Caelan stumbled. Caelan caught him. Stay behind me. There is another way. Caelan pointed toward the far wall. The old tunnels. Vaelor was already moving. The wolf pushed through the smoke toward a narrow opening hidden behind fallen stone. Elara followed. Caelan carried Caelan. They entered the tunnel just as part of the chamber collapsed. Stone crashed behind them. The fire roared. They ran. The tunnel was barely wide enough for two people. Water ran beneath their feet. Roots brushed against their shoulders. The fortress above them shook with distant explosions. Caelan stopped. What's happening? Caelan coughed. Malric. He has the fortress? Probably. Caelan's expression darkened. Then I need to get back. Not yet. People will die. Caelan grabbed his arm. If you return without proof, Malric will turn the kingdom against you. Caelan looked toward Elara. She understood. They needed the truth. Not just survival.
Truth.
Vaelor suddenly stopped. He looked toward the darkness. Then moved left. Elara followed. The tunnel opened into a cavern. Ancient stone pillars rose from underground water. At the center stood a broken altar. On it was a box. Elara approached. The silver mark on her wrist began to glow. She opened the box. Inside were records, letters,
Seals.
names, and a royal crown. Not the crown of Veyr. An older one. The first crown. Caelan touched it. The moment his fingers met the metal, the cavern filled with a faint blue light. Images appeared across the walls. A king, a white wolf, a group of soldiers, and Malric, younger, standing beside the king. Elara watched. The memory continued. Malric was speaking to the old king. He pointed toward the wolves. The king looked afraid. Then the soldiers attacked. The guardian wolves fought back. But they were not attacking first. They were defending the people. Caelan's face became pale. My father knew. Garan lowered his head. He did. Then why? Because Malric convinced him the wolves would eventually turn against the crown. Caelan looked at the image. What happened? Your father ordered them chained. All of them. All except Vaelor. Caelan's voice broke. Why did Vaelor survive? Garan looked at Elara. Because your mother saved him. Elara froze. My mother? She helped him escape. Then why did he come back? Garen's eyes filled with sorrow. He returned because your mother was captured. Elara's heart seemed to stop. She had always believed her mother had died from illness. That was the story she had been told. But it had been a lie. Her mother had been taken. And Vaelor had watched. The image changed. A young woman stood beside the wolf. Elara recognized her immediately. Her mother. The woman touched Vaelor's face. Then soldiers dragged her away. The memory ended. Elara covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. Vaelor came beside her. She pressed her forehead against his fur. You remembered her. The wolf remained still. Caelan looked away. For the first time, the king understood the full weight of what his family had done. He had inherited a crown built partly on silence. And he had spent years defending a prison created by fear. We have to stop Malric. Elara wiped her eyes. We will. The cavern shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Vaelor suddenly ran. They followed. The tunnel rose. Cold air touched their faces. Then they saw light. A hidden doorway opened beneath the throne room. Above them, voices echoed. Malric was speaking. The king is dead. Elara froze. Caelan stepped toward the opening.
His face had changed.
He was no longer afraid. He pushed the door open. The throne room erupted into silence. Nobles turned. Soldiers raised weapons. Malric stood before the throne. The crown was in his hands. He had already declared himself ruler. Then Vaelor walked into the chamber. Snow clung to his white fur. His eyes were dark. His head was held high. Elara walked beside him. Caelan stepped behind them. Malric's face strained of color. Garan raised the ancient records. And every person in the throne room realized the dead king had returned. And one moved. For several seconds, the throne room was so silent that Elara could hear snow striking the tall windows. Malric stood beside the throne. The crown remained in his hand. His face had lost all color. Caelan stepped forward. You lied. Malric slowly recovered. My king. Don't call me that. Caelan's voice echoed across the hall. The guards looked from one man to the other. Malric raised his hand. Seize them. No one moved. He turned. I gave you an order. Still nothing. Vaelor stepped forward. The enormous wolf did not bare his teeth. He did not growl. He simply stood beside Elara. The soldiers stared at him. Then at the broken muzzle hanging from Elara's belt. Malric pointed. Kill the beast. One soldier lowered his spear. He hasn't attacked. Kill it. Another soldier stepped backward. Malric's face twisted. You are soldiers of Veyr. The first soldier looked at Vaelor. Then at Elara. He was chained for 12 years. Malric drew his sword. Then perhaps I should remind you what fear is. He charged. Caelan intercepted him. Steel struck steel. The sound rang through the hall. Malric was stronger than he looked. He fought with the desperation of a man who knew his secrets were finally exposed. Caelan blocked every strike. Around them, Garan spread the ancient records across the floor. The nobles gathered. They saw the seals, the names, the proof. One document carried the signature of Caelan's father. Another carried Malric's. Elara stood beside Vaelor. The wolf suddenly looked toward the throne. He walked forward. Slowly. The court moved aside. Vaelor stopped before the stone steps. He lowered his head. Elara saw the silver mark glowing. She looked beneath the throne. There was something there. Caelan. The king turned. Elara pointed. There. They searched the stone. A hidden compartment opened. Inside was a small silver object. A relic. The ancient royal seal. The same symbol carved into Vaelor's muzzle. Garran whispered. The Covenant. Caelan picked it up. The moment he touched it, Vaelor raised his head. The silver mark on the wolf's shoulder glowed. The relic glowed. Then the mark on Elara's wrist glowed too. 3 lights. 1 bond. The court fell silent. Malric stared.
No.
Caelan looked at him. You knew this existed. Malric backed away. You don't understand. Then explain. Malric laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was the laugh of a man who had lost everything except his hatred. The wolves were supposed to die. Elara stared. Why? Because as long as they lived, the crown could never belong entirely to men. Caelan stepped forward. Malric continued. The first kings shared power with the guardians. The wolves protected the kingdom, but they also judged the kings. He looked toward the relic. Your father wanted absolute power. Caelan's expression hardened. And you? I wanted the same. Malric's voice grew louder. So I helped him. He pointed at Vaelor. That creature remembered everything. The wolf growled. Malric flinched. I kept him alive because I needed him. Elara understood. You were searching for the relic. Malric nodded. It was hidden beneath the throne. The wolf knew where it was. Why didn't you simply kill him? Because the Covenant could only be opened by the Guardian. Caelan looked at the relic. You needed Vaelor. I needed him to lead me here. Elara looked at Vaelor. He had never been protecting himself. He had been waiting for someone to free him, waiting for the truth to return. Malric suddenly raised his sword. A guard shouted. Caelan turned. Too late. Malric struck toward Elara. Vaelor moved. The blade struck the wolf's side. Blood spilled across the white fur. Elara screamed. Vaelor collapsed. The entire room erupted. Malric was tackled by soldiers. Caelan ordered the gates sealed. But Elara heard none of it. She dropped beside Vaelor. Blood soaked her hands.
No.
The wolf's breathing was shallow. She pressed both hands against the wound. Stay with me. Vaelor opened his eyes. Elara's tears fell onto his fur. You didn't survive 12 years just to die now. Caelan knelt beside them. We can get a healer. Elara shook her head.
No.
She looked at the wound. Bring clean cloth. The servants ran. Elara worked. She pressed.
Wrapped.
Held. Waited. Just as her mother had taught her. The night passed slowly. The royal court emptied. Malric was imprisoned. The ancient records were protected. But Elara stayed beside Vaelor. She did not leave. She did not sleep. She rested one hand against his head. The wolf's breathing slowly steadied. Near dawn, his eyes opened. Elara smiled through exhaustion. Good. Vaelor lifted his head. He touched her palm with his nose. Caelan watched from the doorway. The king had spent his life believing strength meant never kneeling. That morning, he finally understood. Sometimes strength meant staying beside something wounded until it remembered how to stand. Sunlight entered the chamber. Vaelor slowly rose. His legs shook. Elara stood with him. The wolf looked toward the fortress gates, then toward the mountains. Elara understood. He wanted to leave. She followed. Behind them, Caelan watched. The gates opened. Snow blew into the courtyard. Vaelor stepped outside.
He stopped, turned,
and waited for Elara. She smiled, then walked beside him. Spring came slowly to Veyr. Snow melted from the rooftops. Streams appeared beneath the mountain roads. The forests began to breathe green again. And for the first time in generations, the eastern tower stood empty. The wolf vault was destroyed. Caelan ordered the iron gates removed. The chains were melted. The stone floor was washed clean. The walls remained. Not because anyone wanted to remember the prison, but because Caelan wanted the kingdom to remember what fear could become when people stopped questioning it. Malric was imprisoned. His name was removed from military honors. The records were opened. The truth was read publicly. People learned what had happened to the guardian wolves. They learned about the Old Covenant. They learned about the healers who had protected the creatures. And they learned about Elara's mother. For many weeks, Elara could not decide whether she wanted to hear more. Some truths hurt even after they became truths. But she listened. And eventually, she forgave her mother for the secrets. She understood why they had been kept. Caelan offered her a place at court, gold, a house, a title. She refused them. I want a sanctuary, Caelan smiled. For wolves. For anything that has nowhere else to go. So they built one, at the edge of the forest, where the mountain began to rise. There were wooden shelters, warm rooms, a small garden, a healing room, and a wide meadow where animals could move freely. People began bringing injured birds, foxes,
Deer. Dogs.
even wolves. Children came to watch. Villagers who had once feared the forest now walked its edge without weapons. And sometimes, beyond the trees, Vaelor appeared. He never belonged to Elara. That was the beauty of it. He was not a pet. He was not a trained animal. He was wild, powerful,
Free.
Sometimes he disappeared for weeks. Then he returned without warning. He would appear near the sanctuary at sunrise. Elara would step outside, and he would lower his head. She would touch him. Then he would vanish again into the forest. Caelan visited often. At first, he came because he wanted to see the sanctuary. Then, he came because he wanted to see Elara. Their relationship did not change quickly. There was no sudden declaration. No grand promise. Only small things. A warm cup of tea left beside her when she worked late. A repaired roof after storm. A walk through the forest. A conversation beside the fire. Trust grew quietly, like spring beneath snow. One evening, years after the wolf vault had been destroyed, Veyr held its first winter festival without fear. Lanterns hung from the fortress walls. Children carried candles. Musicians played in the courtyard. Snow fell softly. Inside the great hall, Caelan had placed the old iron muzzle behind glass. Not as a trophy, as a warning. Beside it was a simple inscription. Fear can become a prison when no one questions the chains. Elara stood before it. She touched the glass. Her palms still carried faint scars from the day she had removed the muzzle. Caelan stood beside her. You could have died that day. She smiled. So could he. Caelan looked at her. Why did you do it? Elara watched the muzzle. Because somebody had to. He was quiet. Then he said, You changed this kingdom. Elara shook her head.
No.
She looked toward the doors. I only opened a gate. The doors opened. Cold air entered. Vaelor stood outside. Older now. His white fur had silvered around his face. But his eyes were unchanged. Elara stepped toward him. He waited. She walked into the snow. The music faded behind her. The fortress lights glowed against the night. Vaelor lowered his head. Elara placed her bare hand against his fur. The wolf closed his eyes. For 12 years, he had lived behind iron. For 12 years, the kingdom had called him a monster. For 12 years, nobody had touched him. Until one woman decided that pain was not the same thing as evil. She had not defeated him. She had not conquered him. She had simply stayed. And sometimes, that was enough to save a life. Vaelor opened his eyes. He looked toward the mountains. Then back at Elara. She smiled. Go. The wolf turned. He walked across the snow. One step. Then another. His enormous paws left a trail of prints beneath the moonlight. At the edge of the forest he stopped. He looked back one final time. Elara raised her hand. Vaelor disappeared among the trees. The kingdom watched. And for the first time, nobody reached for a weapon. They simply stood there, watching the last guardian return home. Above them, the moon climbed over the mountains. The wind moved through the forest. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled. But the sound no longer frightened anyone. It sounded like freedom. And in the years that followed, mothers would tell their children the story of the white wolf who had spent 12 years behind an iron muzzle. They would tell them about the king who learned that power without mercy becomes cruelty. They would tell them about the healer who saw pain where everyone else saw a monster. But most of all, they would tell them one simple truth. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is not fight. Sometimes it is to reach through the bars, touch what everyone else fears, and refuse to let go. And that was how Veyr finally learned the truth about its greatest beast. He had never needed to be tamed. He had only needed to be free.